Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome to another Wednesday night Bible study. If you have your Bibles, you turn to Genesis. That's where we're going to begin. The good old book of Genesis. And chapter 16, we're going to study Ishmael. But before we do, we'll go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day that you've given us, Lord. Your word tells us to rejoice and be glad in it. And we certainly want to do that. Thank you for this time, this evening, Father God. Thank you for those who are here, those who are watching on our Facebook page. Continue to bless our lives, Father God, and just help us to grow stronger and closer to you each and every day. Lord, we thank you. I ask all things in your Son, Jesus' precious and holy name. Amen. All right. Well, we're going to be starting in chapter 16 of Genesis, and Ishmael is mentioned in 16, 17, 21, and just briefly in chapter 25. So you probably know this, but we talked about Abraham in August of 2018, and we talked about Hagar this past August, so a few months ago, and they are connected because of our subject, Ishmael. Question is, do you recall what the promise was that God made to Abraham back all those years ago? It was in all the newspapers.
That he would have a son.
That he would have a son.
And
That he would have
the
descendants
descendants.
as many as the sands. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Actually, that's right before the chapter 16. God's promises that are there in Genesis 15. That yes, he will have heirs, and there'll be so many that there'll be more than the stars. You can't count.
Yeah.
And so as part of that, he's going to have a son. And that's in 15 verse 4. And that's, a covenant that God has made. And we know that God is a promise what?
Keeper.
Yeah, very good. It's going to be on my tombstone, isn't it? He said God was a promise keeper. We're glad he kept his promise and took him. Sooner would have been better, but hey, we'll take what we can get. All right, so as we start chapter 16, Abraham is 86 years old, and that's found in verse 16. And his wife is well advanced in years herself. I think she's about 10 years, 9 to 10 years younger than him, something like that.
Oh, I
So,
read that just today.
What's that?
I read that just today and I forgot.
The age difference?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's right at that. I know she wasn't within a couple years. So, and so think of this. I mean, I know our study's not about Abraham, but then again, it's about all of them. To hear that at 86, what? Okay. I mean, why did this sound odd to Abraham? I mean, why would?
Because he was so old.
Yeah. Exactly. And not only that, but how many children did he have?
None.
None.
That's right. 0. So be different. Say, okay, yeah, I got 20. Which one? Which one is this going to be through? Abraham's wife, which it's Sarah later, so we'll just go with that. It wasn't at this time, and his name hadn't been changed either, so it's Abram. But we'll go with Abraham and Sarah. She decides to intervene and does want to make sure that Abraham has a son because she herself thinks, well, come on, no way. Older lady, this is not going to happen.
Gets him a woman.
She gets him a woman.
Another one.
Just any woman?
Hagar.
Hagar, the one we studied a couple months ago. And she's what? Her maidservant, or handmaid.
Her Egyptian maid.
Egyptian,
Mhm.
yes. That's true.
I didn't even notice that.
Didn't notice that she was Egyptian. It said it on her. Did you not get her business card? We know Abraham agrees with this arrangement, right? Kind of had some comments about that when we studied Hagar. and she conceives. Then she flees from Sarah because she's what? Being
Mean to her.
mean to her. So in Genesis 16:9, we learn something about, well, what do we learn? What does it tell us? We learn something while she's on the run.
Then 16 verse 9.
Yes.
Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her."
Okay. So turn around, go back, right? Does she know that she's going to have a son? She does now,
The
doesn't
angel
she?
tells her.
Because he adds something there in verse 10, right? Your descendants are going to be very numerous as well, right? So it's not just for Abraham, it's for her as well. And then in verse 11, you're now with child and you will have a son. And then we get what the child's name is going to be.
Ishmael.
So she's not only going to have a son, but he's going to be called Ishmael. And then we discover something else in verse 12. That's probably, what does verse 12 tell us?
Just what every mother does not want to hear.
Well, you know, I was coming to that next, but yeah.
He shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren.
Yeah, so,
Oh,
And the
NIV reads
NIV
different.
What
says
does
he's
it
going
say?
to be a wild donkey.
Yeah,
A
it's going to
wild
be a
donkey.
wild donkey of a man.
Yeah.
His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him,
right.
and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers.
That's what it says in the NIV. I wonder what the other translation, anybody have another one?
I got a King James.
Okay.
And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren.
Okay.
Mine is New King James.
Okay.
So similar.
So a little bit of difference there, but we do know he's going to be as untamed as a donkey. So is that good or bad? Be a donkey of a man. I guess it depends. Actually, believe it or not, one commentary I read that said being wild in the sense of being strong and free was a highly admired trait in that culture.
Yes, but this says
I
Yeah,
know.
but the
he
hostility.
will be a wild donkey of a
He'd
man.
always be on the run. Yeah, yeah. And the rest of it tells you that it's not a good thing. Right, right. Because everybody's hand is going to be against him. And I think Connie said, and that was going to be a question. I was going to say, I don't know about you, but I don't want to hear that as a parent about my child, right? But she beat me to it. But you're right. It's like, okay, tell me something good or don't say anything at all, right? Okay, in the last verse of chapter 16, she has the son, and his name is Ishmael. They listened to the angel, did what they were supposed to. And Abraham's how old? 86 years old. Okay. So then we get into the covenant of circumcision in chapter 17. Although we have time, I'd rather finish early than to get bogged down in all that. So we're going to kind of skim through chapter 17. And
Sarah's 9 years younger than.
9.
Yeah.
I thought it was 9 or 10. Yeah.
I knew I read
Okay.
that today. I just couldn't remember the exact number.
So part of God, we discovered that God tells Abraham that as part of the covenant between them and he and all his male descendants, they must be circumcised. Okay, stop. at this point, to verse 13, is there anything to indicate to Abraham? Of course, his name was changed there in verse 5. Okay, so it's still Abram. That these descendants will come through Ishmael, who's now 13 years old. Is there anything to indicate that, as you skim kind of through that, to tell him that it's going to be someone other than Ishmael? It's a two-letter word, starts with an N.
No.
No, very good, Sherry. That's right.
I'm really good at crossword
No.
puzzles.
Huh?
I'm good at crossword puzzles.
Yeah, I bet you are. That's really good. I'm impressed. There's nothing to indicate that at this point that that's not going to be the case, which is what Abraham's thinking, and I'm sure it's what Ishmael's thinking, and I'm sure it's what Hagar is thinking, and I'm certain it's what Sarah is thinking as well. Right? They have no other reason to think otherwise. Then in verse 16, God drops a bomb, so to speak. What is it?
I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her,
Who? Who her?
by Sarah.
Sarah. Verse 15, yeah. You're no longer to call her that, Sarai, you're to call her Sarah, and she's going to be blessed. You're going to have a child. It's like, okay, I don't need another child. I have one. We know that Abraham thought it was sort of humorous, don't we? Because what does verse 17 say?
He
His
fell down
reaction.
and laughed.
And actually, I was wrong. It is 10 years. I was reading verse 1 in that, but there in 17, he
Well.
fell on his face and laughed and said, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old and Sarah who is 90 years old?
Yeah, but
So,
and it could give or take because we know he was 86 and this is 13, so he's 99, so he rounded up.
yeah, okay.
So it depends when you have your birthday. But
He was planning on living for another birthday.
he was. Well, he kind of counted it, said, okay, well, I'll probably be here when he's born, so, yeah, okay. Be born to a man who's 100, so he will be 100 by the time that happens. So, yeah, so, and what is his response there then in 18? I mean, what does he say to God? I mean, he makes a proposal to God, doesn't
Yeah,
he?
he says, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing.
There you go. Like, God, we really don't need this. Right?
Yeah.
We noticed that about some of our Bible characters. They give God advice.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm glad I don't. Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I'm glad I haven't. Oh, yeah, I have today too. Huh. Well, I'm glad I haven't in the last 3 minutes. Given God any advice. Does he? He's never once, never heard this boy say, I'll take that under advisement.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Never thought of that one before.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, and God deals the same way with the characters too, right? It's like, and so I'm going to skip ahead just a point. Someone have go to Isaiah 55:8, because that's an important verse that goes to what talking about advising God.
For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord.
That's right. We always have to remember that. And this is lesson to Abraham.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, this is my world. I created it. So.
But in verse 20, he does say, God says to him, I have heard you.
Yeah, I know.
So he heard him
We,
and he honored that, but he didn't need him to tell him that.
that's right. That's right. And so what do we know about Abraham's relationship with Ishmael then, for him to propose that?
We
It's
must have loved him. He
rock
was his
solid,
son.
He was
right?
his
I mean,
only child.
Yeah, it was his only
Yeah.
child.
Yeah. absolutely. So they had a great relationship. We would think, because if not, he'd be going, yes, all right.
Getting rid of this kid.
Exactly. Maybe a
This
little more
wild
subtle than
donkey.
that. But yeah, I mean, he wasn't overjoyed at all, was he? So kind of saddened. And as Sherry said, in verse 20, God reassures him that Ishmael will be blessed too. And he will be what?
Father of 12 rulers.
The father of 12 rulers. I love when numbers come up because there's the number 12, right? What other things of 12 do we have?
Disciples.
The disciples. Jesus chose 12. Yeah, 12 disciples. And something else that's close to this. The 12.
Well, the 12 tribes of
Tribes.
Israel.
Yes, the 12 tribes of Israel. And how does that work then?
What do you
They
mean?
came through who? Jacob, the
Isaac.
son of Isaac, the son of Abraham,
Abraham, half brother to
half brother of Ishmael. That's right. So there's that number 12. So they have 12 rulers. After hearing what God had to say, Abraham is circumcised, as is Ishmael. He is still treated as an heir, even though now Abraham knows it will be through another son. What do you think Ishmael's reaction was when he heard that he was not the only son of his fathers?
He probably
What do you think?
wasn't happy.
I mean, we're not told if he told him then, hey, this is going to happen, but eventually the kid's 13, 14, he's going to say, oh, Sarah's gaining weight. He's going to know that something, and then obviously when he's born, like, oh, wow, that wasn't for my mom. And what's going on here, right? I mean, he had to have a lot of questions. Wouldn't you, if you were him? I would say he was somewhat even devastated, perhaps.
Maybe.
It depends on what he knew.
Right.
When he heard the news,
Right.
if he did tell him, you're going to be blessed, but,
Yeah.
you're not the one.
Well, and often even now when a child of two parents has been the only child and then a baby brother or sister comes along,
Right.
that's not easy.
No, it's not.
I didn't have that experience, but I'm sure it's.
Yeah, if there's I've known families like that. There's like 15-year gap between older, and it's just two kids in a family or something. So, or even more. And it's like, what? They're going off to college and mom's pregnant.
Well, I was 17 when my youngest sister was born.
Yeah.
And of course, we were all thrilled, except mother and dad.
Think about that.
I mean,
They
they were
became
just
thrilled
like,
later, right?
I'm sorry.
They became thrilled later, right?
Yes. When she was born, then that was a big, exciting day or night. morning.
And your sister knows this story?
Oh, yes.
Okay, good, because I don't want to break it to her here on Facebook.
She's spoiled rotten. She's spoiled. We all spoiled her,
Oh, by the way, your parents did.
Well,
Not good.
She knows that story.
My
Okay.
mom's oldest brother was 25 when Herman was born.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a long time.
And Herman was a special prize. Yes, Herman. Still is, right, Diana?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so why do you think now we get to 21:9? So we'll go up to 21 because there's going to have a child and the circumcision. Everything goes well there. So we're in chapter 21. Right? Is that what I said? Yeah. Okay. So the Lord is gracious to Sarah, as he had said, no surprise there. And the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Yes, promise keeper. She becomes pregnant, has a son, as God promised. And Abraham gave him the name Isaac. And when he was 8 days old, he was circumcised according to God's command. So again, he said he'd be 100, and he was 100 years old when he was born to him. And she says, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. I don't know. I hope that's joyful laughter.
Well, it doesn't say "at," it says "with," so.
Okay. And she added, we would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne him a son in his old age. And then we get to Ishmael here, and then verse 8, the child grew and was weaned. Okay, weaning, according to what I looked at, it could come as early as 18 months, but they say usually 2 to 3, age 2 or 3.
Okay, I just assumed weaning meant that he wasn't, I mean, he was to the point where he could drink out of a cup or something,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
but you think it's like potty trained.
Well, they just, I mean, that's what I didn't have anything earlier than 12 months. So it's at least
Well,
a
I mean, when
year.
you're talking about animals, you know,
Yeah,
Well,
not
we're
just
but
talking
referring
about
to
having
children.
weaned,
Yeah.
they're weaned off of the,
Well, but I think young women wean their babies a lot sooner now than
They may have
they
that.
did in the years past.
Good point. Think of Moses. I mean, Noah. No, Moses. I'm sorry, Moses. Because at the riverbank, and then
Yeah.
took to the
Yeah.
mother to nurse, and we think that was probably 2 or 3, maybe.
Yeah.
So then he went back, said, okay, he's good. And I think too, part of that weaning process, they had a lot of infant mortality.
Yeah.
And that was like a hurdle, and you got to a certain point, and
then you were over the hurdle.
yes. So, but whatever it is, if you do the math, you know, Ishmael could be 14 to 17 years old. So we'll say somewhere 15, 16-year-old.
Yeah.
Okay. At this point. So, and then in where are we at? Verse 9, Sarah saw that the son, and they don't even say Ishmael, you know, that's kind of, the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had born to Abraham was mocking. Why do you think he did that?
Well, I mean, it doesn't say what he was mocking.
Well, he's mocking, yeah. I mean, I would guess that he was mocking, you know, Isaac, but you know, you're right.
But don't you think if he had not been mocking Isaac, that Sarah wouldn't have been upset like that enough to kick him out?
Yeah, and to go back to the previous point, to get under someone, the younger you are, the less he's going to get that mocking. So it's like 6 months old, you know, that 6-month-old. I mean, if he's trying to get under Isaac's skin, you know, if he's jealous or whatever the reason. So if he's 2 or 3, then it's more of a, when you're mocking them, to kind of get it. But definitely Sarah's going to get it regardless.
And I would think he would be jealous at that
Well,
point because.
Would you be? I would be.
Well, probably. I wasn't jealous of my sister
No,
because
but-
I had 2 other sisters, but.
A little
you know,
different
it's them.
circumstances.
Yeah, that was, I mean, this was a big deal.
It was a big deal.
I
Really.
mean, he had been the heir, now he's not the heir.
Well, but does it tell us that he even knows that yet?
Well, I mean, he was the oldest son,
I know.
so whatever there was, he would have been the heir to it. I
Right.
mean, if it was, 2 sheep, they'd have been his.
Yeah, but it hasn't said yet to him specifically that that's
And it never is.
not the case.
No.
Yeah.
No, never is.
But, you know, he has to think there's something amiss. I mean, because again, his mom wasn't his dad's wife.
Right, she was.
That's
Yeah, but that was a
servant.
common practice.
Yes, it was.
At that time.
It was.
So he saw it
was.
throughout everybody.
It
I mean,
was. It was, but it's a
Yeah.
little different when even then, there's a close, it's just
Sure glad I don't know anything about that.
Weaning was a great time of celebration. I mean, they threw a big party, right? It had to be definitely, it couldn't have just been a look, whatever the mocking was. She saw it. So, and it really upset her. Of course, she could have been hypersensitive as well, right?
Sure.
One commentary said they really weren't sure what the Hebrew word mocking really meant. So maybe he was playing with Isaac in a weird way or something. I don't know. We just don't know. Well, it'd be on the video, I guess. Welcome video.
My translation says scoffing.
Jeering or scoffing?
Scoffing.
Okay. So whatever it was, Sarah didn't like it. She objects, and she's going to get her way, isn't she?
Yeah.
They're going to get banished from the tents of Abraham. We're never told that Abraham's feelings toward Ishmael lessened or that he was treated unfavorably, are we? Never told that. Things, however, started to change when Isaac was about 2 or 3, like right here. So, and that's what we just read. So what's Abraham's reaction then after verse 11, or at verse 11? Because she says, get rid of him. And not only that, but the slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. Wow. Okay. So I think it was more than just, yeah. It must have been something pretty serious. Or again, she was just hypersensitive, and so that's it. And maybe he'd done it for a while. We don't know that either. We don't know if he picked on him all along. We don't know.
Well, it says Abraham was very upset because
He was.
of his son.
He was concerned for
But then
Ishmael.
God spoke to Abraham. So it was in the plan, obviously. It says, whatever Sarah has said, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called.
Right. Do you think Ishmael, again, it's probably maybe 16, we'll say, give or take, either said this or at least thought it, hey, Dad, are you going to let your wife there get away with this? Hey, what's going on here? I'm your son. We've been together, man. We've been best buds for a long time. All right. No. Ouch. Maybe. I mean, teens process like that or not, especially back then. But he does intercede, right? And again, as we said in verse 11, and again, God gives great reassurance there in verse 13, doesn't it? Everything's going to be, I'm going to take care of him as well. Don't worry. So then in verse 14, as we move along, there's a kindness shown to Ishmael and Hagar by Abraham. What does he do?
Give him food and water.
He sends them off. They're going to go away.
Woohoo. I mean,
What's that?
I said, big deal.
Big deal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He could have just gave him $1 and said, here.
A skin of water.
A skin of water. Not much water. I don't know how much
Yeah.
food.
Yeah.
Didn't overdo it, obviously, but he was like, okay.
And they were going into the desert.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. His wife, she may have been standing there tapping her foot, like, move it along. Maybe not. Sorry, Sarah, if that's the way it was. Wasn't the way it was. So does the drink last and the food?
No.
No. Well, of course not. They're wandering in the desert. So verse 15, when the in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Why did she put the, now think again, it's not a little boy,
Yeah, I know. I
it's a
mean, you know,
teenager.
yeah,
He must have been very weak, very
I guess.
thin 16-year-old boy.
He had
Could've been
to
short.
already tower over her.
Could have. Probably weren't, again, height back then.
Yeah, but she wasn't very tall either. I mean, you know, so.
I don't know. Maybe she's just a strong woman. The Egyptian women were strong. I don't know. They built the pyramids. Oh, no, it was the men.
Well, they fed the men that
They fed the men that built the
built
pyramids, so
That's right.
I don't know. But she did, didn't she? And then she couldn't take it, could she? What's it say in verse 16?
She went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for the thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And she sat nearby and she began to sob.
And we talked about that when we studied her. You know, like, why did she kind of abandon him almost? And then what did Ishmael do? What was he doing? Verse 17.
No, he was crying.
He was crying. We know that because it says God heard the boy crying, right? Okay, so he must have been crying. Yeah. And God said, quit crying, you crybaby, right?
I don't think so.
No? He didn't say that?
No, instead he said, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid.
Do not be afraid. Yeah, it shows concern. I have heard the boy crying. He's over there crying. I hear it too. And you're crying as well. What's the instructions there?
Get up and lift up the lad and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation.
Yep, lift the boy up. So he has to be very frail. Again, or she's really, really strong because, you know, of course it couldn't, you know, a 16, 17-year-old today could be 6'8", you know, probably not back then. And kids are big today, 16, 17-year-olds old. It's just not that way back then. It wasn't even that way 30, 40 years ago, folks. I mean, I don't know if I've told you this story, but when I was in high school, the guy was,
40 years ago.
huh? I know, it's forever ago. But they were getting rid of our basketball jerseys. And the biggest jersey that we had back then wouldn't fit the smallest player. This was like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
That's how much it changed. I know, that's granted, it's 100 years different.
But
I mean,
still,
they're just bigger.
by
Kids are bigger.
16, boys are usually taller than their mother.
True.
If he wasn't, there would have been something wrong with him.
Right. But again, he's in the desert. He's probably, you know, they've lost weight. He's just frail.
Well, he's like
perhaps.
devastated.
He could be.
Well, it's the word lift. I mean, does
Lift,
that
yeah, we don't
literally
know.
mean pick
Pick
up?
up. You're
Or
right.
does it mean
Because
just
it did
to
hold his
reach out
hand
your
and just say,
hand
"Yeah, I'll lift
and
you up."
pull him to his feet?
Very true, Connie. That's a great point.
Yeah.
But you know, as far as bigness now, you look at the wrestling classes that they have in high school. You know, back 30 years ago, 40, 185 heavyweight. Now there's like 4 more classes above 185. So, and I don't even know if they have the lower ones. Like
Have like
98.
105.
105 is the lowest,
Yeah, well, and I'm not sure about less than that, but I
and
think.
that's third graders wrestling.
Well, if it had
Hey,
been Zach,
I wrestled
If
105.
it-
Yeah, but you did back then.
if it had been Zach, that would have been his second grade.
Yeah, I
Exactly.
know, that's what I'm saying. It's like huge.
Yeah, 82.
She takes him by the hand, and God opens her eyes there in verse 19, and she sees a well of water. She went and filled it and gave the boy a drink. and he's restored. He gets his strength back, right? Because we know that because verse 20, God was with the boy as he grew up. So he survived the ordeal.
And he became an
And-
archer.
He became an archer. Yeah. And what else did he do? Where did he live?
In the
In the desert of
Wilderness.
Iran.
In the desert. He's an archer in the desert. Okay. Sounds like a lot of
There
fun.
being much to hunt in the desert, but
Yeah, he must have been a good archer, I guess, because whatever there, he had to get it.
Iguanas.
Yeah, I don't know. You're right.
Uh,
Wilderness, I get. Desert, no.
and mine says wilderness.
Does it? Okay, well, that's a little different.
Mine.
You know, if you think of the
King
deserts
James
if you're going
Right.
out to Arizona in the desert, that's different than a wilderness because, the journey that Moses and, for years, they were through the wilderness. It didn't say it was barren place, or as we picture it maybe. And just, not a lot of people around maybe.
Yeah.
Which is, in his case, a good thing because he was going to be against them anyway. And
Yeah,
they were
really.
going to be against him.
You
So,
shoot snakes and jackrabbits, about it in the
Yeah.
desert.
yeah, in a desert, but you could call Brown County parts of that wilderness.
Mhm.
So that's a big difference. So I think that's probably a more accurate portrayal of where he actually was. Because what are you going to kill and eat in the desert? And then we find out one more thing about him. His mom gets him a wife from
Egypt,
Egypt. Why from Egypt?
because she was Egyptian.
That's right. That's what she did. She's like, my son's going to have an Egyptian woman. I'm an Egyptian woman.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So, and then Ishmael has the sons. We know that, and he actually has a daughter. And daughter married someone whom we studied. I don't remember when, but I have it on my sheet here. Not that that's going to help you. I'll give you a clue. We studied this person. Yeah, I like that one.
Esau.
Ooh, very good. Esau. Yep. Esau married one of Ishmael's daughters. Very good. This is why I don't like giving you who I'm going to study ahead of time. You already know all the answers.
It's because we study what we know. You want us to not know the answer?
No. That's good. No. I don't want to seem smart ever. Okay, so that's actually the end of it, except for in chapter 25. We get to verses 7 through 9 at the end of Abraham's life. Verse 7 of Genesis chapter 25. Altogether, Abraham lived 175 years. I always like verse 1. Abraham, so broken up by the death of his wife, took another wife and she bore him like 30 children here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids. Yeah. So anyway, I'm just laughing. But verse 5, he left everything he owned to Ishmael. You see that?
Mm-mm.
What's yours say?
Isaac.
Isaac. Oh, that's right. He left everything he owned to Isaac. But while he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. So he's generous. He's like, okay, you're my sons too. You're my children. You get something too, but you're out of here. This is Isaac's place.
Verse 9.
Mm-hmm.
And in verse 7 and in verse 8, hold on.
Okay.
Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age. 175. Anybody met a 175-year-old?
No.
No, not later. I do have to share this. It's just so cute. We had a 102-year-old at the hospice house. And she didn't like it there because there was nothing to do because she was getting better. So they put her in a nursing facility with a 105-year-old, and they love each other.
Oh, how sweet.
Isn't that great?
Yes.
Oh, God.
I hope that's not a HIPAA violation. So,
Uh,
You didn't tell us their names.
I didn't.
You're okay.
So then he was gathered to his people, and here's what I think is very encouraging to me in verse 9. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave. On and on. So what do we learn about Ishmael from this? Just that one verse.
That he still loved Abraham no matter.
Yeah, he did that.
Yeah.
That was a
And
very
care
good
about
point.
Isaac too. He wasn't all bad.
Wasn't all bad.
Wasn't
Yeah.
bad.
I
I
mean,
mean, he came
He
and,
came
and
and
him and his brother together
did
buried their
the
father.
right.
if they had differences, he put them aside at least. Yes, and that's very commendable because some people won't do that.
Yes.
Wouldn't then and won't now.
Yeah.
And so yes, that's says a lot. And he could have been said no. He got everything. I don't want anything to do with it. But out of respect for his dad, his love for his dad, I think more than anything,
Yeah,
he was there.
Mhm.
That speaks volumes.
Yep.
All right, so much of what happened, these are kind of some final thoughts, and then we're going to not have final thoughts because we're going to shift into something a little different. Much of what happened throughout Ishmael's life cannot be blamed on him, right? Really can't. I mean, he didn't choose that. I mean, he was caught in a process much bigger than himself. God had other ideas. His actions when he mocked Isaac, though, showed he had chosen to become part of the problem and not part of the solution. Because, he was right there. His mom wouldn't have corrected him, right? I mean,
But he was a kid.
huh? He was still a kid.
Yeah, he was
That's
a
right.
kid.
He was.
Yeah, and that's what
He
kids do, even to their
Oh, gosh.
their
Brothers and sisters
brothers and
fight like
sisters.
cats and dogs.
That's right.
Even
Or
when
brothers
they're
and
foreign
brothers.
to-
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so now we get into Ishmael and another religion. You know any other religions that talk about Ishmael?
Islam.
Islam, that's right.
Yep.
The Islam religion, he's considered to be a prophet and actually an ancestor of Muhammad. You knew this, right? Of course.
And so is Abraham. Abraham is revered in the Islamic religion.
Of
Well,
course.
because they need Abraham's to
to
legitimize
Ishmael.
what's his name, Ishmael.
So he's in the Quran as well.
Yeah.
The other thing is that here's something that's different though. The Bible teaches that Abraham took Isaac to sacrifice. The Quran, on the other hand,
Yeah.
says it was Ishmael
Yeah.
that he took to sacrifice.
Yep.
And that's a big difference.
It's a big difference.
So Ishmael is a cornerstone figure within Islam. Okay, and I don't know much about Muslims and Islam, and I've never read the Quran, and I don't think I've ever seen a Quran. I've never held it or anything. Anybody have a Quran? You do?
I
Should've had you
studied
bring
it
it.
when I was in college back in like 1976.
They had colleges in the 70s? Oh, okay.
Gosh.
I'm sorry. I was there too. So go ahead. So
we
you
had
had.
to know world religions
Uh-huh.
for international relations.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I mean, that's great.
I didn't give up my Christian faith or my Christian religion.
Well, we're glad. That's still counted among us. He's mentioned several times, actually, it says throughout the Quran. He's invoked as a messenger, prophet, and one preferred by God. I'll just read from Quran 1954, chapter 19, verse 54. It says, "And mentioned in the book Ishmael, indeed he was true to his promise and was a messenger and a prophet." And it also says, "And Ishmael and Elijah and Jonah and Lot and all of them we preferred over the worlds." Chapter 686. The Quran upholds the Muslim belief that Ishmael was Abraham's ultimate heir, not Isaac. Separation.
Yep.
Interesting, isn't it?
And they're still doing that.
Still doing it.
Yeah.
They want that little bitty piece of property that all of the uh, Jewish people live on.
Yep. They go to Mecca. Yep. Islamic tradition states that Ishmael, Abraham, and Hagar, okay, got it, were sent on a journey over 4,000 years ago to Mecca, which is in Saudi Arabia. The Quran states that it was in Mecca that Abraham received a message from God to, quote, purify my house for those who perform, and the word is capital Tawaf, and those who stand, and it says in parentheses, in prayer. And that's in the Quran 22, verse 26. Abraham and Ishmael were then instructed by God to build and raise the Kaaba, Kabah, which today is Islam's most sacred shrine and a central component of the religion's 5 pillars. Come on, back. What are the 5 pillars?
Hey, you know what? 1976, man. I haven't picked up my Quran since then.
If you would have riddled those 5 off, I probably fell off this stool. Like, wow, that's pretty good. Muslims are expected to make at least one pilgrimage to the Kaaba during their lifetime. Okay. Let's see. Is there anything else in here that's kind of interesting? Muslim pilgrims at the Kaaba in Mecca, and Islam says that when Abraham took Hagar and Ishmael to the desert at Mecca, Abraham and Ishmael built the first house of worship for Allah, of course. And the Kaaba is a cube-shaped building with a mosque built around it. The tradition is to circle the Kaaba 7 times while praying. Is one of the 5 pillars again of Islam. Another thing was that the story that's different is about the water in the desert. When Ishmael was thirsty in the desert, Hagar asked Abraham if Allah had commanded him to bring Hagar and Ishmael to the desert. When Abraham answered that it was God's order, Hagar knew she and her son would find water. She went 7 times between the hills, and Allah caused a spring to come up from the ground to quench Ishmael's thirst. So Mecca became known for its sweet water, a premium commodity in the Arabian desert, and the spring is considered a source of holy water. So that's different. Of course, you're going to have some differences, right? You have the same thing, you have the same book. And can Islam be traced to Ishmael? According to Muslim beliefs, Islam can be traced back to Ishmael, both through Muhammad's forebearers as well as through the story of Ishmael, Hagar, and Abraham in the desert. However, due to the nature of both religion and early history, sources do not necessarily provide reliable scholarly evidence.
Yeah, it doesn't, probably doesn't say.
But he's considered a patriarch of Islam. So there you go.
Muhammad was like
Muhammad was
the year I think like 800
Yeah,
around that.
yeah. Long time after Jesus had.
Right. A long time after Jesus, a long time after Abraham and,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Ishmael.
Yeah, so I mean, so here's the thing, and that continues to today. They're still a force. I mean, the Muslims are out there, right? We have to love them. We don't agree with what they espouse, but we still love them. They're made in God's image. The thing is, if you backtrack, and we can lay this at Sarah's footsteps or at her feet, because if she wouldn't have decided to do that, there is no Ishmael. Correct?
Correct.
So don't need to intervene. Just leave it in God's hands, right?
Doesn't Ishmael mean the wanderer?
It always tells me what those names mean, and I just kind of
I
delete
thought
it.
it-
It's a water
I
bearer?
think it does. I think it means the wanderer.
Could be. Isaac means he laughs, right? It would make sense, because all those names had meanings. Very true. All right, any other thoughts or concerns about Ishmael? Anything you disagree with? Yes. God, come on, you gotta disagree with something. Sure?
What's there to disagree with? It's
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, what's there to disagree with?
What's the point?
We're all on the same team.
Just disagree with the Quran. How's that?
Well, yes,
No, it can't be right if the Bible's right.
that's right.
One of them has to be wrong. I do know that.
Yeah.
Correct? All right.
And this has been around a long, long
It's
time.
been a
to be
long
wrong.
time.
Yeah.
Not been proven in there yet, so I don't think it's going to be. All right, we'll close in prayer, and then we'll be back again next week. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this study on Ishmael, Lord. There's so many things that we can learn from the actions of others, and we're just so grateful, Lord, that we can learn, and we don't have to make all the mistakes ourselves. Help us in our walk with you, Lord, and help us to learn to not give you advice because you don't need any, and help us to stay in our lane, so to speak, and just continue to look to you for answers, Father God. And we're so grateful that you are a caring and loving God and are so concerned about us and want to guide and direct us. And we just thank you for that. Lord, help us as we go forth this week and bring us back again for another Bible study next Wednesday. Lord, we thank you, and it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And we end.